Hi, welcome to Fox Valley Headline Makers. I'm Ryan Morton. I had to switch gears for a moment. Earlier this week, I was on Fox Valley Today with Barb Nadeau. So every Friday, of course, we talk about the local political issues. And believe it or not, we're coming up to another election. It seems like an election just passed us by in November, but the municipal election will be April 9th. And one of the issues that voters, at least in Somonauk School District, will get to vote on is one that they did see in November, and it did not pass. I'm forgetting the exact vote total. I'll ask one of our guests. Jay, do you remember how it went down?
It was approximately 1,300 no votes and about 900 yes votes.
Okay, so about a 400 vote difference then from in November's election. But the school board is trying to put it forward again because it's a very important referendum for the school district to help them regain funding that they've been losing the past few years because of lower property values. And we're going to break all of this down and explain exactly what the situation is and why, as a Somonauk voter, you need to be as informed as possible when you head to the polls to know exactly what this referendum is all about. So our two guests are Dr. Dawn Green, the superintendent of Somonauk School District, and then Jay Wiegman, who is a trustee in the village of Somonauk. But you are running for re-election, but you're not opposed. There are less candidates than there are open seats.
There are two of us running for 3 slots.
So you're not a school board member. I know that's a very contested race, so we won't get into any of those political issues. You're just advocating on behalf of the referendum.
That's right.
And then Dr. Green, being in the position you are, you can't advocate for or against, but hopefully you'll provide us with some valuable information that people can consider when they head to the polls.
Absolutely.
So let's start by talking about how you would characterize, Dr. Green, the fiscal situation for Somonauk School District.
Well, I would probably start with saying that this is my second year here, and when I interviewed for the position in really studying the finances of the district, I remember at my second interview saying, looks like we're probably going to have to go for a referendum here. And of course, board members like, oh no, it's always been good here. Things have been fine. We'll get by. But you were just starting to see it through the financial records. You were starting to see those assessments, not just falling off a little bit, but severely dipping down. And of course, everybody knows what's happening with the state and their lack of funding, and it was just kind of this perfect storm swirling out there, because at a time when local property taxes are decreasing, the state should be increasing their share, but of course they're not doing that because they don't have the funds either.
And of course with EAV, you're looking at a 3-year rolling average. So when you're starting to see a problem, that problem's going to continue because you're just going to keep averaging the bad years.
That's exactly right, which is why we're at our very worst right now, because at least the last couple of years we had some higher EAVs on on that 3-year average, but now we're to the point where we've got 3 really bad years. So of course, that's what we're dealing with here.
Now, Jay, you have children in the district, right?
I have one child in 1st grade and another a couple years behind that.
So you're looking towards the future and wondering then what's going to be available in the school district. You've already seen over the past few years, before your child got into the school district, some cuts made.
I'm actually looking even beyond that. I'm looking at it both as a parent and as a resident of the village. And I'm looking at the impact that this is going to have on the schools. For instance, my daughter had full-day kindergarten available to her. One of the cuts that would come if the referendum fails is that kindergarten would go to half-day. And we think that that's not going to benefit anybody. Additionally, I'm looking at it as a taxpayer and a homeowner, and looking at how much property values are going to fall even further if the schools fail and people leave the community in search of better schools, or if people simply don't want to relocate to Somonauk as they used to, because the schools' quality was so high. People used to come to Somonauk for the schools. And that's not going to happen anymore if we have to lose varsity sports, if we have to lose music programs, if we go to half-day kindergarten, if we continue to have classrooms, particularly in the 4th grade, we have 32 students in each classroom. And in the last 3 years, we've had to cut 15 aides. So not only do you have a higher student-to-teacher ratio, but you have 1 less aide in each room to help out. And so the middle kids in any class are going to do okay, but the high end, the low end are both going to suffer, and everybody in turn suffers. So it's a twofold concern for me. It's what's going to happen to my kids, and it's what's going to happen to my community. I'm a member of the village board, and I can see what this is doing to businesses, what it's doing to homeowners, and how it's going to continue to tear down the fabric of the community. So it's a rather global concern for us.
We're going to do some number crunching later in the show to talk about exactly how much money would come from this referendum and how much it would cost each homeowner within the district. But let's start by going back to a few things you mentioned. There's this excellent pamphlet that's been put out by the Somonauk schools for the referendum. And what it tells you is, where can people get this information, by the way, Jay?
We've been distributing that, and we'll continue to distribute another one now that we can update with the cuts that have been announced. But if you go to www.citizensforsomonaukschools.com, we can provide you with a pamphlet. We can also, they have been made available at a number of businesses and can be found in Somonauk.
One of the things that's in this pamphlet is, you mentioned how Somonauk schools have always been a very good school district and something that people have wanted to come to. There's some very interesting numbers to show you I should say, anyone who's interested in looking at how their district is performing. Standardized test scores, 85% meeting or exceeding, and that's compared to a state average of 75%. But then you look at all the state averages for operating costs per student, the average teacher salary, and the average administrator salary. Somonauk is under that. They're doing more with less, basically, and I think that's an important distinction for people to realize.
We've been doing more with less, but now we're getting to a point where the cuts are so severe that we're having to cut into very core, basic things. We're having to look at teacher reductions even further than the ratio that I discussed that we see in the 4th grade. It may be that if certain programs like ag and music are cut out, that the school day is going to be shortened as well. You had mentioned that we had a rolling decrease in EAVs to begin with, and I think that's a sharp illustration of the problem that we face. Is the first 3 years, it was slowly going down. This year alone, property tax assessments will probably fall as much as they did in the first 3 years.
Combined.
Right. So if you were looking at a 10% decrease in the first 3 years, and that's pretty average across the board, you're looking at about another 10 to 11% decrease in the assessments this year.
Dr. Green, you mentioned, well, we've heard from Jay some of the possible cuts a little bit. Before we get into exactly what's been proposed or what the cuts will be if the referendum doesn't pass, before you started as superintendent, there were some cuts already. Do you remember what those are? I'm sure you've looked at them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they cut, well over $1.5 million out of the budget. Now, you can say, were we, overspending? No. First of all, we had more students, and we lived in a different time period where you wanted the best. You wanted what you could provide for our students. The curriculum, the resources, the materials, all those advantages. Can any district or any place cut, trim, and get to the point where hey, we don't maybe need to replace this book every 5 years or this computer every 3 years. We'll keep it a little longer. We'll do that. You can always do those types of small cuts, and maybe one less cafeteria person, one less bus, things like that. We've done that. We've done that, and in fact, when we for our rating for our bonds, we were downgraded last year. And kept that downgrade this year, didn't go further, but that's one of the things that they talked about, Moody's, and they said, you've picked all the low-hanging fruit, you've done that. Now, now you're really going to have to start cutting into things, and really what they did say is it's not, as we've preached from the beginning, is it's not an expenditure problem. It's a revenue problem. And you can't fix a revenue problem by continually cut, because we are getting to the point where we're going to have to look at cuts, quite severely that will limit kids' day, limit their opportunities, and really drastically change things. And that's that's not what we want.
And if I can address the notion that perhaps this was caused by overspending, I think first you have to look at the unarguable fact that revenue has fallen nearly 20%. And beyond that, you look at other school districts that are facing the same concern. There's a referendum going in Streeter. There's one, I believe, going in Leland. Earlville has already had one. Sandwich has indicated that they're probably looking at a deficit of $600,000 next year. DeKalb County is having the same problems. And a lot of people look around and they say, well, when we did this last year, they said, why Somonauk? Why not anybody else? Well, we were just ahead of the curve. The other thing is that there are different county treatments of taxes. And in DeKalb County, Sandwich can raise its taxes because it's a tax cap district. LaSalle County is a non-tax cap district and doesn't have the ability to raise those taxes. So other schools were able to address this problem. Leland, Earlville, which had the trouble early on, Somonauk can't raise the taxes in the same way that Yorkville can, even though assessments are going down.
Right. I mean, that's a key distinction that people need to understand, is that there is no other way to increase the pot. This is right. It will do nothing but go down, which I think leads to some concern for people too. Anyone who is I guess worried about voting for this referendum, and Jay, you and I discussed this last year in on the radio. I guess I'll address it to you, Dr. Green. Once it's already at that level, the goal is to get back to funding as it was before. Eventually, property values will go back up. Who knows when, but at some point in the future, they will go up. Well, now you're getting more money than you had previously. So people are worried about adding extra to the pot when it's not needed.
Right, absolutely. But I think if you look back at Somonauk's history, that we have never done that. We have not. We have abated money back to the taxpayers when we got more than we needed. We did not tax at the maximum rate on years that we didn't need that. I mean, truly, I look back at the history and I look back at our previous, at least the two previous superintendents that I know, fiscal responsibility was high on their priority list. And I think, clearly if you look back at the data and the research and the tax years, which are right there in our AFR from our auditor, it shows we did not tax at the max rate. We gave money back. I mean, even as late as 2010, we were abating money back to the taxpayers. So I think we have shown that we're not about that. We're not about getting extra money that we don't need and stockpiling it. If you look at some other districts, they have plenty in reserve, and they're talking about these big deficits that they have. They're gonna fill those deficits with their reserves, at least for a while. We don't have that. We truly don't have that. We don't even have what the state says you should have in
6
reserves.
months?
Yeah, right.
How many?
We have less than 4 months.
Okay.
And typically the way the tax cycle works, it's a little backwards, but the tax money that we get in will go to pay our bills from this year. So we have to borrow from that money. So that 4 months worth of reserves, by the end of the school year last year, we borrowed almost all of it to make payroll and pay our bills. Now then the tax money comes in June and July, and then you're back okay.
Sure.
And hopefully that'll last you. I know my goal this year in talking to my bookkeeper is it's February. Have we had to dip into our reserves? Have we had to borrow from ourselves to pay bills? And we are to that point now, and which we were last year too. So
it's expected when you're not able to, or you can't even pay all the things that you need to. That's why you're cutting things. How can you also be putting extra money aside and building up that reserve? We need to take a break on the show, but before we do, I'm sure there are a lot of people at home who are wondering what the bottom line is, and we're going to mention this in more detail on the other side of the break. But Jay, if you could just give us an idea on how much this would cost a homeowner, just so they can start mulling that over.
We anticipate that given the amount that the assessments are expected to drop, that the increase in taxes will basically bring that level. So what will be paid in 2014, we expect to be almost the same as what was paid in 2012.
Okay, so we'll get into more details then and get a bigger breakdown of the numbers when we return on Fox Valley Headline Makers.